If you buy a franchise and it's Saturday afternoon and you're on the 13th hole on the golf course and you get a call and they say, hey, the HVAC broke or we ran out of material or the oven stopped working, do you have what it takes to throw down your golf club, get in your car, drive to the store, get the crisis fixed, and then go back?
Franchise buyers don't fail because they didn't work hard enough. One reason they fail is because they didn't understand the numbers before they signed. Today, we're breaking down the financial side of franchising with CPA John Quattrocchi, and this is the part nobody explains clearly enough. John, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your history and how long you've been doing this and what kind of experience you have with franchise financing.
Well, sure. I've been involved in franchising for over 25 years. I started my practice in the early 90s, and I guess I started attracting franchisees shortly after that. Started with a bunch of Dunkin' Donut clients and Dairy Queen clients. Moved on to Quiznos clients and a lot of service franchises as well. So obviously with a mixed bag of results based on some of those brands that I have worked with in the past.
So you have a well-rounded, many years of experience there working with numbers and franchises.
Yeah, I mean, understanding the numbers is key. I'm going to toss out a lot of cliches that I have invented today when we talk. And the first one is, what is properly measured can be effectively managed. And I think that's something very important for people to understand and deal with. If the whole idea of management by the seat of your pants or gut feel or instinct, that is passé, that is gone. You need real numbers, real information. There's so much competition out there. There's so many potential holes in the boat that can destroy your profit margin and your bottom line.
Yeah, for sure. You definitely can't fly by the seat of your pants when you own a franchise. And you do have to stay on top of those numbers. So you're absolutely correct. So basically, what we're going to be talking about today, we're not talking about theory in franchise financing. This is what actually happens financially when people buy into a franchise. And I think a lot of people go into a franchise not fully understanding the financials, be it the amount of money that they need to buy in. So newsflash, it's not just a franchise fee. I mean, if the franchise fee is $40,000 and all you've got is $40,000 in a 401k that you're going to cash out, you probably shouldn't do that. That's probably not a good idea. So let's start at the beginning. So before someone signs anything, any agreement, any FDD receipt, any of that. So when someone says that they qualify financially for a franchise, so what does that actually mean to you as a CPA?
In a lot of ways, it's like getting a mortgage for a house. And just because you qualify for a $500,000 mortgage doesn't mean you should go out and buy a $550,000 house and be completely and fully leveraged, right? You qualify for a mortgage. That means that's how much money the bank wants to loan you. The same thing, you qualify financially, you can do that, but there are so many other factors that go into that decision as to how much operating capital you'll need. You know, and some FDDs say 3 months worth of operating capital, maybe it's 6 months and maybe it's longer. And it depends, you know, you have another source of income. Do you have a spouse that's working? How long can you go without pulling money out of your new franchise is a very important consideration. And everybody's circumstance is a little different there. I try not to ever use the word "it depends" because that's not a real answer. The real answer is we understand your personal situation and what you hope to get out of your new business that you have just acquired.
So in your practice, do you sit down with a prospective franchisee before they've signed a deal and go through their personal financials and maybe what they can get from an SBA loan or other lender and kind of go through what they're going to need? Walk me through that process.
Yes. And, you know, an SBA is obviously the most efficient way to go out and borrow money to start your business. And there are certain franchises that are SBA approved. That makes the process a little bit easier. I think there are three sides to every deal, at least, right? There's the actual franchise and the business model. There's the location, and there is the actual skill and talent of the operator. And merging those three together is what creates a good and successful concept. So if you have an established brand that you're thinking about acquiring, you're basically 1/3 of the way there. There are so many ways to finance a franchise now, and the ROBS, or the having your retirement plan buy your franchise, is one way to do it. That obviously puts a lot more eggs in the basket of the brand you're buying, because what you're doing is not only mortgaging your current income, you are mortgaging your retirement income on this brand. So you are doubling down on the bet on yourself.
Yeah, it's very risky. I've got a lot of franchisees that I talk to that have done the ROBS, and it didn't work out so well for them. So they're, in their late 60s now and having to go back to work and try to make a living after they lost everything.
It's something that people are aware of, that risk is there, but I don't think sometimes they understand how dramatic a risk that is. And losing everything when you're 24 is one thing. Losing everything when you're 63 is quite another. So that all has to be mitigated and understood. And again, has to do with a lot of other circumstances too. But I mean, those people that do ROBS, I mean, a lot of them do really great jobs, and they really have good information and solid there. I would think that on a sliding scale, if you're going to mortgage your present and your future on a brand, it should be a much more established brand. And we certainly don't want to use the word guarantee, but something that's closer to a guarantee than maybe a fresh emerging brand.
What is the difference between net worth and liquidity? And why do you think buyers misunderstand the difference?
The best way to phrase that, here's another cliche: you can't eat dirt. You can own 1 million acres outside of Oklahoma City in real estate, but that's certainly not liquid investments. You can't take a bucket full of dirt and take it to the grocery store and buy groceries with it, right? So that real estate can be a very unliquid asset. Of course, you can always borrow against it too, but what that has inherent risks too. So something that is freely and easily spendable is liquidity, as opposed to an asset. So a retirement account, again, might be part of your total net worth, but it's not liquid. Your personal residence, you might have a lot of equity there, but you want to take a home equity line of credit and mortgage your house to buy a franchise. So that is not necessarily a liquid investment. Frequently, and I'm sure you've seen it, somebody might take early retirement from a Fortune 500 or a big company and leverage whatever stock they've accumulated in there against the purchase of a franchise.
Yeah, so when I was with Domino's, one thing that's always stuck with me after all these years is the way that it was explained to me is that liquidity is any asset that you can turn into cash in 3 business days.
I mean, that's a good rule of thumb. I guess you could sell your real estate in 3 days, but you probably wouldn't get your value out of it. I wouldn't want to have to sell 10 acres of real estate to meet payroll on Friday if it was a Tuesday. Yes.
A lot of the brokers that I talk to, they talk about, I only talk to high net worth clients. So they have to have a minimum of $250,000 net worth. And so we go back and forth on, but how fast can they turn that into cash to buy a franchise? I mean, they may have all of their asset in their personal residence, and they can't turn that around to buy a franchise. It would take them at least 30 days, I would think, to do some sort of a closing on a second mortgage. And then the SBA, that takes a while, that whole application process.
Well, I mean, they're guaranteeing your debt. So I think it's only fair that you allow them the opportunity to analyze your ability to repay. Mm-hmm.
But in your experience, How undercapitalized is the average franchise buyer when they walk into a deal?
They can be quite undercapitalized if they have unrealized expectations. And, if your marketing plan is to unlock the door, there's a lot of competition out there, and there's a lot of people, trying to pull in. Unfortunately, one of the saddest stories there was I guess it's a test case, or it's the role model for failed franchises, but it was a sandwich franchise that grew exponentially and then collapsed almost instantaneously. And I think anybody in the industry knows who I'm talking about. I walked into one of the new brands and new locations that they had, and it was an older guy, and it was 11:30 sandwich concept at 11:30 in the morning, and he's sitting on a high back chair backwards, staring at the door. He spoke very little English, and I looked at him. I said, "Hey, how you doing?" I met him for the first time. He said, "People no come." And I said, "What?" He said, "People no come. I want to make sandwich. People no come." And I'm thinking, who sold him this brand? He was actually a semi-retired truck driver who had left being an 18-wheeler over the road guy and decided he was going to buy a franchise. He had minimal, at best, people skills. He had even less marketing skills. I don't see how anybody in their right mind thought he ever had a chance of being successful.
Yeah, there's a huge disconnect with a lot of brokers and inside sales reps with franchises that if they can write a check for the franchise fee, let's just get them in the door, because it's all about the numbers and how good their item 20 looks. And the press release that they can put out saying, we sold another franchise in Atlanta, Georgia, or wherever.
Well, and I mean, that's one of the pitfalls. And I've met some franchisors that have more guys on their board of directors or women on their board of directors than they actually have franchise locations, and they have all the C-level people, but they have absolute no locations, or one location or two locations. And the financial strain on those guys to meet payroll at the franchisor level has got to be so great that they are more concerned about the initial franchise fee, keep the balls in the air, than they are on the royalty stream that they're generating to keep things going for the long term.
Yeah, it seems that franchisors, particularly, I see it a lot in emerging brands, that their goal is to sell, and they're keeping the lights on with the franchise fee. And that's not how you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to have happy, profitable franchisees that are working the system that you created, that you sold to them, and you're surviving off their royalties. The lights are on because of their royalty payments, and you're not dipping into the ad fund or the tech fund. It's straight up royalties. And that's how franchising is supposed to be.
And it's like, we got to sell 3 more by the end of the month. Or that is probably a major difficulty you have with emerging brands. And, we've seen it here, there, and other places. So, and then of course, the ones that have no company locations too, or no.
Yeah, I see that a lot. And they're still selling to people.
The rule of thumb I've seen is about, you want 10% of the stores to be corporate stores, give or take.
If it's such a gold mine and it's so profitable, then, if I were a franchisor, I would want more than 10% of them if the system is so great.
Well, yeah, if you can't sell to yourself, why are you selling to me? If your concept is so great, why do you not have a buyback provision? So let's say your franchisees, they put 20% down, they get an SBA loan for 80%. And then, the franchisor can easily say, we will take over your location. We will take over your SBA debt. At any point you say, no, thanks. That would be an interesting guarantee.
So, I think it's safe to say that many people that are embarking on this journey of owning a franchise, they're not just writing a check for the franchise fees and the build outs and all that. They're just I just don't think that there's very many people out there that can do that. So they're having to finance this endeavor. So can you walk us through how an SBA backed loan actually works in a franchise scenario?
Well, like I said, the first thing is they're going to look at is the brand, and there are some SBA approved lenders. How much teeth that actually have is kind of problematic, and how you register with the SBA. But that's a good step forward. I mean, obviously, your personal credit is going to be a great factor into that. Your SBA loan officer is going to be somebody very valuable to you, whether you are buying a franchise or another business. They will, using your words, they will be a reality check for that and say, you really want to put this much money into this kind of an operation, and does that make sense? And in a lot of ways, yes. I want to make my commission, or the SBA lender wants to make their commission for selling the loan. Yeah. Just as if a franchise broker, he wants to make his commission for selling a brands. The best ones are the ones that are able to be fair and reasonable. And so, no, this is not for you. This doesn't make any sense. This is not a good model for you to follow. To use another cliche, some of my best friends are franchise brokers. So I see how they work and I see how they operate. And I understand, when the popular terminology that's going out now is we're trying to get rid of the term sell a franchise and go to award a franchise. And there's got to be some sort of mutuality of, yes, we've got a great brand. Are you going to be a great operator?
Yeah, that's definitely a very important consideration. So you mentioned personal credit scores. So aside from personal credit scores, and you can give me a range of credit score, maybe if you know kind of what they look for that. But what are lenders looking for that buyers don't think of that they might be looking at?
Well, again, I think they're looking at whether the personality side of it, whether you would be a good operator and whether you have the skill set to operate this business. And it does, and it can go way beyond the numbers. Let's see if this person has the ability to pay back. I mean, obviously, a credit score gives a bank or a lending institution an opportunity to determine how responsible an individual is with his or her credit, how much they have paid things back, what have they done over the years. And a lot of people that have not a great deal of credit might be people that have been institutionalized in big business in corporate America for a long time, and they don't really understand what it's like to put everything on the line for that. So that would be part of the factor. So they could have very, very, very high credit score, but no practical uses of credit and no sweating it out, because no offense to anybody in corporate America, but you have a good week, you have a bad week, boom, that direct deposit pops into your account Thursday at midnight. When you are faced with the situation of, what do I got to do on Thursday or Wednesday or Tuesday to make sure there's enough money in the bank to meet payroll? That's a totally different mentality. That's why dealing with experienced loan officers and very experienced franchise brokers it can be a valuable tool to you. Again, good ones and bad ones, right? Somebody says, all right, this is how much money you have in the bank. This is the most expensive franchise I can sell you. Boom, boom, done. Hopefully there are very, very, very few franchise brokers like that out there. Just because they got you qualified doesn't mean you should buy it.
Right. Yeah. And I see a lot of franchisees, we talked about this a little bit earlier, about, they're given a total loan amount and they're maxing out that whole amount. So they're completely leveraged. And if you're completely leveraged and you go sideways, there's no wiggle room. How are you going to get out of that? And that's when we see a lot of these issues with these receivables loans advancing on their credit cards. And then they're taking an obscene amount of interest. They're taking taking it directly out of your daily deposits. And I've seen a lot of franchisees that are getting in deep trouble with these.
I mean, it only gets worse and worse and worse. And there may or may not be a good effective exit strategy there, and how you're going to get that paid off when you're barely making the minimum payments on that and you're crashing. Now, that said, one of the things that people do initially is come into my office and say, hey, I quit my job yesterday. I'm going to go out and try to get a loan to start a franchise, to buy a franchise. Well, you just eliminated your income source and you've made yourself so much less lendable. Maybe you should line up your franchise, your financing, and then quit your job. I see that a lot. It's like, no, I get your money lined up and then go ahead with your deal and whatever plans you have to make.
That's part of why I started doing what I do with this, is because I see so many people doing things like what you just said. They're making snap decisions and they're not thinking the steps through all the way and not being able to visualize a future after they've made this specific decision, like just quitting my job and I'm going to go get a franchise. It doesn't work that way.
If you buy a franchise and it's Saturday afternoon and you're on the 13th hole on the golf course and you get a call and they say, hey, the HVAC broke, or we ran out of material, or the oven stopped working. Do you have what it takes to throw down your golf club, get in your car, drive to the store, get the crisis fix, and then go back? When that happens, I remember I went into a convenience store right by my office after midnight once, and the woman that owned it, she was wearing an evening gown and she had furls and on. And what are you doing? And she said, my 12 to 8 guy didn't show up. I was on a date, had to leave, had to come and run the store. You got to be willing to do that. And you can't tell the guy that's leaving at midnight, I'll just lock the door and forget about it. It takes a special person to do that.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of a disconnect between the corporate mindset of being a W-2 employee and then just switching over to, you're responsible for your revenue coming in. You're responsible for all of the bills. You get paid last. If you don't have enough money coming in to pay yourself and your people, guess what? You don't get a paycheck.
Conversely, this is the best way to lose favor with me if you're working for me or you're employed by me, is to say that's not my job. It's like, okay, somebody's got to do it. There are only 6 of us in this room. And, quite often it's me, and, we, with whatever ball we have to pick up, we pick up, and everybody has to pitch in and understand this. John's on a Zoom call and somebody walks in and needs help. Somebody out there is going to help them.
So we kind of talked about the personal finances of a franchisee. So let's go into the FDD item 21. So this is a section that talks about the franchisor's finances. And so what should franchisees look for first when they're looking at item 21 and they're going through all these financial statements?
A brand new franchise is probably going to have very little or anything in their item 21. So what will happen is you have 2 pizza locations and you decide you wanted a franchise. What you would do is, and what happens often is, you form a new corporation, you put a little cash in the bank, and then you have a little bit of equity, and that is your item 21. It says nothing about the performance of your 2 actual locations, because this is a totally separate company and a totally separate brand new business. So it really didn't tell you anything.
Yeah. So are there rules for how much money a franchisor that's just starting out, how much money they need to have in their bank account?
No, not really. No.
So they could just start a franchise with $30,000 in a bank account.
Right. And so their entire balance sheet is cash in the bank, $30,000, owner's loan or owner's equity, $30,000, and that's it.
So we have all these financial requirements on the franchisees that are going to come into the system, and no financial requirement for the support of those franchisees on the franchisor side.
Certainly not in the item 21. And then, emerging brands are probably not going to have anything in their item 19 either, which is item 19 for people out there. That's earnings claim. Whenever a franchisor talks about money, potential profit, potential income, that's an item 19 disclosure.
Right. So they're not talking about the franchisor's revenue and expenses and all of that. They're talking about the franchise system in that item 19. So when you're looking at a franchisor's financials, you've got Joe franchisee sitting in front of you and he's handed you this FDD and you're looking over the item 21. What are you looking at first when you go to look at the franchisor's financials?
But that goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of, are they relying on initial franchise fees? Do they have a revenue stream of royalties? Does the revenue stream of royalties, does that cover their expenses? Are they so desperate that they've got to sell you a 4-unit thing to make payroll at the end of the week? And how solid they are structurally. And there are cases, and there's one going on right now of a franchisor that went bankrupt. And from a logical level, it doesn't make sense. And it'd say, all right, well, we get $50,000 in royalties coming in every month. We need to spend less than that. I mean, it just doesn't seem that difficult. But like I said, you pack your employees, and you get people on the board of directors and people you're paying to, and your C-suite is stuffed full before you're ready. Then yeah, you are headed for the iceberg.
One of the things that I see quite a bit of when I look at the financials in item 21 is what I see a large amount heading out for member distributions or owner distributions. And you're leaving the franchisor entity with $200 in a bank account. So what are your thoughts on that, on those types of distributions that aren't going to salaries and aren't going to other expenses, or just distributions out to an owner or owners?
Clearly somebody that created a concept, created a brand, worked it, made it manageable, made it workable, is entitled to be compensated for their efforts and their work. But we gotta see if it's a cash out situation where they are pulling the money out as soon as they make it and they're not leaving room. Again, going back to the initial franchise fees, that should be to greater or lesser degree a break-even proposition. If your initial franchise fee is $40,000, your franchisees should reasonably expect $40,000 worth of efforts. Now, commissions to franchise brokers could be up to 50% of that. And again, if you see where they took in $50,000 in an initial franchise fee and paid a $45,000 owner distribution, then that would be a red flag that they're not planning on supporting you very well.
In a lot of FDDs I see, and it's becoming more and more common these days, is there's statements in there that registration states are forcing the franchisor to put in there that the franchisor there's not enough financial stability there for system support. So what does that tell you when you see a note like that in an FDD? And it's usually in the front of the FDD.
I mean, that's very clearly telling you that they've got short-term financial goals and not long-term financial goals, right? And it's an indication, it's not proof, but it's an indication that they're not planning on being as supportive as they need to be, I think is the best way to phrase that. And it's like, we don't have the resources to do that. And, do they have somebody that's going to give you ongoing training and ongoing support and is going to be innovative, or are they just cashing out? Mm-hmm.
And so for our listeners that maybe don't understand how registration states work, so the franchisor submits their application and their renewal, and someone at the state level will review that FDD and will spit it back out with, hey, we need X, Y, and Z. Sometimes they will have the franchisor put in there that statement that they're just not financially able to provide as much support. So, is there one thing that you can spot in maybe 5 minutes or less that a buyer might completely miss?
One way to phrase that is it's very easy to believe something if you really, really want to believe it. And that doesn't make it any more or less true.
Rose-colored glasses. So yeah, you may really want this franchise. And so you're kind of going to overlook the things that maybe aren't as palatable as what fits with the narrative that you want.
I mean, one of the disadvantages that those of us on the financial side, as opposed to the people on the marketing or sales side, is that, we kind of deal in facts and they kind of deal in emotions, and emotions always win. I can sit down and I could go over and I say, well, the rate of return, might not be what you think it's going to be. And we look at this number and I don't know if that's efficient. And then, the marketing person says, well, we're going to make you rich. Okay, I like that guy's idea better. I guess one of the buzzwords that scares me a little is semi-absentee or automatic, or, it's like you're getting the impression that this company is going to run itself, and there are not too many companies that do that. And so that's always a bit of a stickler, to get full-time profit after from a half-hearted effort just doesn't seem to math to me. I don't know what you've seen, but I'm sure very similar. No, I mean, like 5, 6, 7 years into a process where you have multiple locations like you had at one point, I'm sure you had fantastic managers that were taking care of each location, probably had them trained to act as if they were owners. And I don't know, you might have given them a small share of the profits to make them think that way.
For me, I was also it was a conscious decision for me to be very actively involved in the day-to-day of my business. So at any moment, a customer could walk in and I could be answering the phone. I could be making a pizza. I could be routing a driver. I could be mopping the floor, cleaning up a spill, washing the dishes. I was very hands-on, and I split my time between each of my 4 stores. So my employees all knew me. I had an open door policy and did fairly well with that. It's a lot of work, though. It's a lot of work. I think people underestimate how much work goes into a restaurant, much less 4 at a time, but it's a lot of work, but fun.
Well, I mean, interesting. I met with a new guy and he was opening up a restaurant years ago. And I said, why are you opening a restaurant? He said, well, I'm tired of working so hard. Yeah, I put like 90 days on him. And just following his career, he sold that place off after less than 6 months. So
this brings me to the part that nobody wants to think about when they embark on this franchise journey. They don't want to talk about the potential of failure. And so when a franchise fails, what is the financial impact on that?
Well, again, if you put in all your retirement plan money and it's gone, you do not have a job or a career. You do not have life savings. So you got strike 1 and 2. The other downside is, and I think there's a certain prejudice in hiring where people are reluctant to hire somebody that's been entrepreneurial, that has owned a franchise or owned a business before, because you're going to instantly be pigeonholed as thinking, oh, they're used to doing things their own way. They're going to want control. They're going to want to do this. Or they're just looking for a place to park for a year till they get their next venture going.
Right. Because in the mind of that corporate manager that may be interviewing you, they want to be where you just left. They want to be that independent person and not have somebody micromanaging them over their shoulder. And, you're sitting there going, oh, no, you really don't.
Why would you want to come back when you have all that freedom and flexibility? Then, there's what I call the overnight success syndrome. You work all night in your store. You open one location, you open 2 locations, you're working 80, 90 hours, no vacations or whatever, and you get going. And then once you're successful, people say, oh, you were an overnight success. Or, gee, that was really easy. People don't see. All they see is the duck that's over the water, not the feet underneath paddling so hard. And that's fair, and we don't want people's sympathy. We don't want, because as the expression is, this is the life we have chosen to lead, and we wouldn't have it any other way. And that's the way. That's the entrepreneurial spirit that so many of us have, and so many of us, have a passion for. That said, sometimes people go into franchising not as an entrepreneur. They're just looking to sort of latch on and ride the coattails of somebody else, and that's not really the way it works.
Some of the things that I can kind of think of just in talking to franchisees that are struggling or have closed up completely, so they're facing foreclosure on their house. They're unable to pay their SBA loans. And with the SBA, as you know, they do put a lien on your primary residence. So if you default, they can and will take your home. Bankruptcy is also a consideration for many of these franchisees that I speak to. They're facing having to file a personal or a business bankruptcy. And then coupled with all of that, going through the emotional and psychological hardship of all of that, then they're faced with, like you said, really an inability to find gainful employment after they've been self-employed for so long, because there is this mindset out there in corporate America that self-employed folks don't make good employees. When in fact, I would say it's completely the opposite, that, we do make great employees and that we're able to think ahead. We understand the whole picture and not just this tiny little bubble that you want to put us into. And we can be a tremendous asset in corporate America.
Way back when I was working for accounting firms that did audits, it would amaze me when you go in and you talk about processes and you talk to somebody in the accounts payable or receivable department and say, what is your job? And they say, well, something pops up in this box here and I work on it and then I put it in this box here. I said, well, who puts it in? I don't know. Where does it go after you're finished with it? I don't know. There is a lack of a big picture sometimes with that.
Let's talk about everything going well. How can you set up a franchisee from day one to do it the right way?
Measure it properly so you can manage it effectively. Let's make sure that we understand the number of where we're going. In a restaurant, if you're 60 or 90 days before you realize that your cost model is off, it might be too late. So we want to make sure that that system is in place and there is feedback and there's definite communication with what we're doing.
Yeah, that brings me up, that makes me think about new franchisees. And I ask them about, well, how have you set up your business? Did you set up a chart of accounts? Which buckets are you putting these expenses in? And do you have somebody set up to do your bookkeeping on a monthly basis? Because you're going to need to look at that P&L on a very regular basis. Well, all of your financial statements really, to see where you're at. Like, you need a snapshot at any given moment in time of where you're at financially.
We know 80% of small businesses fail. That number is dramatically reduced if they buy a franchise. That number is further reduced by if you hire an accountant with an accounting system and a reportable system in before you get started, your chances of success go up dramatically. So that's a very important step to make sure that it's just generating revenue is no guarantee of profit by any means. So that's something we'll always look at. It's very self-serving in me to say it, but I'll say it again. You hire an accountant that knows what they're doing, that communicates your numbers with you, your chances of success go up dramatically. Now, I will say this also to franchisors. Statistics will show the number one reason why a franchisee or a potential franchisee looks at acquiring one and backs out is because they're intimidated by the IRS and they're afraid of all the paperwork that's involved. So if you at the franchisor level have somebody, oh, I don't know, like me, that can be a referral source that you can send your franchisees to and say, listen, we know you're worried about that. Don't worry about it. Just call John. He'll handle it. And John's got a team that's here that'll walk you through that understands what you're going through.
Yeah, so Domino's had that, and I really appreciated how much effort they put into helping the franchisees understand their own financials. And they actually had a list of approved bookkeepers that knew their chart of accounts that they wanted all of us to use, and knew restaurant financials, and knew what they were doing within the Domino's system. So that was tremendously helpful for me to have a bookkeeper that was able to do that and knew the importance of producing accurate financial statements when I needed them.
Well, if you are out there listening, franchisors, give me a call, and I will be dedicated to helping your fam. And beyond bookkeeping, I like to say bookkeeping and tax preparation is like a grocery store checkout clerk. Whatever you put in your cart, they scan in. What you want further is somebody that's going to impact that bottom line. That's going to tell you your cost of sales are too high, that your labor is out of control, or that you have too much labor at too short a period of time. And, I was having a discussion with a guy yesterday who has some labor challenges. Rather than be mediocre 7 days a week, maybe you could close your restaurant 1 day a week and be great 6 out of 7 days. And that, I think we could put our chairs in the same place. Make sure that you understand your numbers, and somebody's going to impact your bottom line, and somebody that's going to go in and say, hey, we got these 7 or 8 and 10, 20 tax saving strategies. It annoys me when people say, oh, well, all the big guys get the tax breaks and us little guys don't. Well, you know why? Because they hire somebody that helps them find them. There are no secrets in the tax code. There are no cages that only the big guys can look at. If you think small, you're going to live small, and you're going to create small. But your business, your franchise location, your multi-unit concept, that deserves to be treated with respect, because you're right. When you said it constantly throughout this last hour, your whole life is on the line. Somebody needs to treat it, and somebody will treat it with the seriousness it deserves.
For a franchisee that is currently in a system, so what number should they be watching every single week so that they can stay on top of things?
Obviously, the top line is important, and that's kind of the disconnect that we haven't touched on. Your franchisor gets paid a percentage of your top line. Your family lives off the bottom line. So there are always a lot of suggestions to maximize your top line by spending a lot of money that doesn't get to the bottom line. So those are decisions that we have to make. So they recommend a big sale on a particular product that cranks up the volume, but lowers your gross profit, increases your labor, or affects your product cost. That might be great for them, might not be good for you. So that's the inherent conflict between the two people making a living off of your particular business.
Right. I do see a lot of conflict between franchisees and their franchisor when the franchisor comes out with a special that significantly raises the expenses. Well, the franchisor is not caring about your expenses because they're getting paid royalties off the top line, like you said. So it doesn't matter.
Well, I call it the difference between a negative coupon and a positive coupon. So if they send out a coupon to your Domino's and said $1 off a pizza, somebody walked in expecting to spend $10 and they spend $9. That's not great for you. Now, a positive coupon is buy one, get the second one for half off. They came in expecting to spend 10 and they spend 15. So that generates more revenue. Whether it affects the profitability is another story as well. I would imagine marginally it probably does, because your rent doesn't go up, your utilities don't go up very marginally, and even your labor doesn't go up materially on that. So if you're looking at a food cost of somewhere between 25 and 35%, given a 50% discount, you're still making a little bit of money on that.
Yes, a lot. Domino's is actually very good at making sure that franchisee profitability when it came to couponing was top of mind. If you could force every franchise buyer to review one thing, so that they come and they see you, what would be one thing that you want them to take away and look at?
What we've talked about, a lot of this is not easy and it's not automatic. The disconnect might be you put $500,000 into a franchise and you lose it and you go broke. That's going to have ramifications the rest of your life. The franchisor sells you a franchise, you go broke, and they go, whoops. And it doesn't necessarily affect them exponentially negatively compared to what it does to you. And it's, yeah, well, maybe we can get another guy in that territory, or maybe there's and they've already banked their franchise fees. They've already made some royalties off of you. So while it's not continuing revenue, they made revenue and they made profit off of you, and you've lost everything. Again, I know you're trying to get me to go more on the positive than the negative, but I think that's the challenge and the thing to think about. And it's like the guy that's asking you to go all in is not going all in himself. And that's not necessarily bad, but it's something to be understood. And again, what you talk about with no corporate stores, it's like, okay, you won't go all in anywhere and you're expecting me to. Why should I bet on you when you won't bet on you?
I think we're pretty much done here. I just want to talk about where to find you, because I always recommend that franchisees talk to a franchise-centric attorney and get with a CPA. So for you, where can they find you if they want to reach out to you and have you look over their franchise that they're considering?
My email address is very simple. It's johnq@johnqcpa.com. johnq@johnqcpa.com. You can email me anytime. I think I have the most publicized cell phone number in the world. That's 770-652-7000. My website is cfoatl.com. And I have in the process of launching a new brand, and I think you're going to like this. We call it FAST, Franchise Accounting Systems and Taxes. And so if you want your stuff done fast and accurately, you'll call me. We like picking up the ball where your franchisor might have left off, and what happens the day after the grand opening becomes an important thing to us. You found me, or I found you on LinkedIn, and I'm in there commenting on the franchise space and the reality and some of the great people that I've chatted with over the years that I've never actually met face to face, that are always putting great information out there. And they comment on a lot of your posts, and then he found mine on theirs, and I'm out there too. So I'm pretty easy to find.
John, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day during tax season, no less.
Well, I wish we were at the multi-unit franchise conference in Vegas starting today. They always put that right at the worst part of tax season. All right, Ron, thank you very much, and I appreciate it. And it's always great to get to know and to see somebody in the franchise community and helping people grow and actually keeping their dreams from turning into nightmares.
Yes, exactly. A noble cause.
All right. Well, we'll run into you at some sort of franchise event, I'm sure, soon.